Although you may not realize it, Latin is used every day, whether it be roots, terms, or phrases. You can see a lot of Latin words in writing. In some cases, it can be a placeholder as well. Lorem ipsum is a sort of gibberish made-up Latin that you see in website themes, stock graphics, pre-made layouts, etc. It is used to fill space in a print or digital layout where the editor's work will soon reside. Although it is in gibberish, it has Latin origins. It is based on a passage from a piece of classical Latin literature dating back to 45 BC, making it over 2,000 years old. In specifics, lorem ipsum comes from De Finibus Bonorum et Malorum, on Extremes of Good and Evil by Cicero. The essay is a treatise on the theory of ethics. In actual writing, you will see a lot of words that are shortened, which are actually abbreviated for something in Latin. PS stands for postscript, but the full Latin meaning is postscriptum. When you are using this in writing, it is to refer to a script that comes after a main body of work, typically after a letter as an afterthought. Its translation is after what has been written. The term VS stands for versus. This comes from Latin meaning turn toward or against. Typically, when using this abbreviation, it is used to indicate that two entities are opposed to each other, for example, in courtroom or in sports. When you need to show that a list continues on without writing it all out, most people refer to the abbreviation etc. Etc is short for etc., which in Latin translates to and others and the rest. In writing, when someone needs to refer to something they had written previously, perhaps to solidify a point, they use the abbreviation IE. This is short for the phrase id est, which is Latin for that is. A similar term to IE is EG, which is short for exempli gratia, Latin for example. Vice versa is a phrase that is used to show how things can be switched around and pretty much equate to the same thing or that it can be interchangeable. This Latin phrase can be translated to the other way around. In legal terms, we also see a lot that comes from Latin. To veto is to exercise a veto against a decision or proposal made by a lawmaking body. Its Latin origin meaning I forbid. The phrase status quo means the existing state of affairs. An example is, Jenna wanted to proceed with the next step, but then she decided it would be better to keep the status quo. It comes from the Latin phrase in statu quo, which means the state in which. The noun alibi is the same word as its Latin root alibi, which means excuse. When you provide an alibi, you are giving proof that you could not have committed a crime. Alibi is easy to confuse with alias, which means an assumed or false name. Relating to the term alias, alter ego is a phrase in Latin that means another I or another self. It is a Latin phrase that is commonly used to indicate the opposite side of one's personality, or it means a trusted friend who seems a part of oneself. Consensus is a Latin phrase meaning agreement, and is a legal concept describing agreement between parties as to the exact meaning of the terms of a contract. Incognito is where a person hides their real identity or appears under an assumed name so as to avoid being noticed. It comes from the Latin word incognitus, which means unknown, not investigated. The term modus operandi is a Latin term that describes an individual or group's habitual way of operating, which represents a discernible pattern. Modus operandi, commonly abbreviated as MO, is mainly used to discuss criminal behavior and is often used by professionals to prevent future crimes. Quid pro quo translates to what for what, or more commonly known as something for something. This is an exchange of acts or things of approximately equal value. A quid pro quo is only illegal if it breaks the law, as in the case of a bribe, blackmail, or some sort of contingency. Subpoena comes from Latin subpoena, a combination of sub and poena, meaning penalty. A subpoena is a written court order to compel an individual to give testimony on a particular subject, often before a court, but sometimes in other proceedings such as a congressional inquiry. You can use a subpoena to require a person to come to court, go to a deposition, or give documents or evidence to you. Stare decisis is the doctrine that courts will use to precedent in making their decisions. It is a legal doctrine that obligates courts to follow historical cases when making a ruling on a similar case. Stare decisis ensures that cases with similar scenarios and facts are approached in the same way. Stare decisis means to stand by things decided in Latin. Ultimatum is a Latin word which means the last. It is the final and ultimate proposition made in negotiating a treaty or contract. An ultimatum implies a rejection which leads the break-off in negotiations. Ultimatum comes from Latin ultimatus, Latin last final, and ultimus, extreme, last, furthest, farthest, final. Pro bono comes from the Latin term pro bone publico, which means for the public good. Pro bono refers to legal service provided voluntarily by law firms, law schools, and attorneys without monetary compensation. Pro bono refers to legal service provided voluntarily by law firms, law schools, and attorneys without monetary compensation. Pro bono can occur in hospitals as well. This is when doctors can choose to take on a surgery for free or at a reduced cost. Other terms in Latin take place in hospitals, morgues, and other medical facilities. Latin was the language of science up to the beginning of the 18th century, so all medical texts were written in Latin. The English language history of doctor began in the 14th century, when the word was first applied to a select few who likely didn't know much about medical work. They were people who had read and studied religious thoughts and ideas, who had a special seal of approval from the Roman Catholic Church as people able to talk about and explain the doctrines of the Church. The word doctor comes from the Latin word for teacher, itself from docere, meaning to teach. Rigor mortis, which translates from Latin as stiffness of death, sets in quickly and usually ends 3 or 4 days after death. The condition results from a lack of certain chemicals in the muscles. It may be affected by muscular activity before death as well as external temperature. Post-mortem is used to describe a body that has deceased. Post-mortem is Latin for after death. Doctors use this term to describe the examination of the body after death. Ante-mortem is also used to describe the body before death. The term malignant in medicine is used to describe a cancerous tumor, which comes from the Latin root mal, meaning bad. The term benign in medicine is used to describe a non-cancerous tumor, which comes from Latin benignus, which was formed from bene, meaning well. Lateral is a Latin root meaning side. It can be used in dentistry, such as using the term lateral incisors, referring to the 2 teeth located to the right and left sides of the central incisors. Lateral is also used in the term anterolateral tract, a sensory pathway from the skin to the thalamus, an egg-shaped structure in your brain. The Latin roots dorso and dorsi, meaning behind, in the back, are used in terms such as dorsal branch. The dorsal ulnar cutaneous sensory branch of the ulnar nerve is frequently used to localize ulnar nerve lesions to the distal forearm or wrist. Sub is a Latin root that means under. It refers to terms such as subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that's underneath the skin. The Latin root intra stands for within, which is used in the term intra-abdominal. This usually refers to conditions such as appendicitis, Crohn's disease, or ulcerative colitis. I hope that this video has given you more of an idea of all of the Latin terms, roots, phrases that are all around us.